Okay. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And I think that should summons Mariano to the screen, our one virtual participant. Well, perhaps I'll start, and if Mariano doesn't show up momentarily, then okay, there we go. Mariano, welcome. Can you hear us okay? Okay, we can't hear you. Okay. Okay, well, welcome, everyone. I'm Eric Schwaab with the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm going to serve as moderator for this session. And I have to say that and this is not exaggeration, I'm so excited for this session. And I think you all are going to really appreciate the fact that you were here for this session. People have asked me over the course of the week what I've been most excited about, and this is at the top of my list. So this is really focused on unlocking the potential of the ocean's mesopelagic or twilight zone. Mesopelagic species, twilight zone species that move up and down in the ocean water column play a critical ecosystem function. They are amazingly abundant for such a little understood group of species, and they represent one of the world's great biomasses. And you're going to hear more about that. And yet we're only now beginning to understand the critical role they play in helping to address climate change. So better understanding, quantifying, and ultimately protecting this critical group set of species and the role that they play has only begun to be the focus of ocean research. And so we're going to talk about some of that today. We're going to talk about some of the great benefits of these mesopelagic species, the role of management in conserving these benefits, and ways to ultimately ensure that globally we make the highest and best use of these important mesopelagic species. So we're really happy to have with us today two of the leading oceanographic institutions in the world, along with Rutgers. So we have Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, Scripps is a leader on this, Rutgers, that have helped to shed light on many of the ocean's mysteries and unlock the ability of the ocean to provide benefits to humans, including the ocean's amazing ability to regulate climate. And these institutions have advanced science to overcome assumptions that persisted for many years, namely that carbon cycled in the ocean was based mostly on chemistry and physics, and that fish and whales and other biota were not important in the role of the ocean to the carbon sink. Well, that is changing dramatically, and we're going to hear about that. So we now know those assumptions were wrong based on this emerging research. And marine species like zooplanktons and mesopelagic fishes really do make a big difference, and they matter a great deal. The flow of carbon that these fish facilitate is massive. Recent estimates based on newer acoustic tracking that we're going to hear about have found that this biomass may be 10 to 30 times higher than previous estimates, which were around 1 billion tons. So up to 95% of the total global fish biomass. And there's an astonishing diversity of species in the mesopelagic zone. Everything from the relatively charismatic mola mola, or ocean sunfish, to the most abundant vertebrate species on Earth. The most abundant vertebrate species on Earth, the bristlemouths. So far, the biodiversity of the mesopelagic zone has remained largely undisturbed by human exploitation. But that could change quickly as ocean resources, particularly those that provide sources of fish meal and fish oil around the globe, are depleted. We're at a pivotal moment where we need to coordinate research efforts to fully understand the benefits and really drive this global conversation forward. And we need to leverage this science to coalesce around a plan a plan that any future mesopelagic fishing that might emerge can be managed resiliently to promote global food security, equity, and most importantly, this climate role remains paramount. So to dive into this more, we have a lineup of excellent panelists. We are going to hear from Dr. Kilaparti Ramakrishna, the Senior Advisor to the President and Director of Ocean and Climate Policy at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, who will present an overview of some of the exciting scientific research that's already being conducted and on the horizon. We are going to hear from Dr. Cymie Payne, Associate Professor at Rutgers and Chair of the Ocean Law Specialist Group of the IUCN, who will present some international policy dimensions relevant to management and conservation of these important species in this important part of the ocean. Then we will hear from, on the screen, Dr. Mariano Gutierrez, the Scientific Director of the Instituto Humboldt, who will present a regional perspective from the northern Humboldt Current on the tension between the value of extraction versus conservation and this critical climate role. And then finally, we are super excited to have with us Ambassador Peter Thompson, the UN Special Envoy for the Ocean, who will present a call to action for the need for management and protection of this vital resources. Their presentations, presuming they are economical with their time, will be followed by Q&A with the panel. I'm going to warn my panelists, as well as those of you in the room, on a tight schedule in the room. So we are going to leave here on the hour, whether we are finished or not. And questions will have to go out into the vestibule. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to, I completely neglected one of my duties, which was to advance the slides as this process was going forward. And now we're going to hear from Rama, who's going to talk about the work at Woods Hole. Rama, the podium and the clicker, and may you make better use of it than I did, is yours.
Eric, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction and for your leadership in organizing this session. This is an important topic, one that is very dear to us in the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. As you know, you have had a TED Audacious grant for methane, and we have one to explore this particular topic. And at about 5 years of research, both by scientists in our institution from around the world, we had a review conference to take stock of the scientific findings. And I'm pleased to say that that conference was just tremendously exciting in terms of the results that the scientific community had brought forward. But I'm also pleased to say that that conference was headlined by two people, one of who is right here with us, Peter Thompson. The other was not a so well-known James Cameron, who was busy filming Avatar 3 in New Zealand, as he told us. But there were lots of very exciting things about the ocean twilight zone, and then you talked about the importance of that, the abundance of the species and the work that they do in sequestering carbon, almost without much of any notice that we can think of. Of the various facts that were advanced in that conference, one stayed with me. And I want to talk more about that because we are meeting in the context of the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Convention, and the rallying call is about stabilizing the global climate system and what we need to do. But one thing that we have not taken as much notice of is that the role that the species in the sea, that particularly in the twilight zone that you highlighted. And the number that stayed with me was the carbon that is sequestered by the ocean twilight zone. These are rough estimates because of the range that I'm going to tell you, but the rough estimates are between 2 to 6 billion tons of carbon per annum. Now, we're talking about carbon, and of course, all of you are very familiar with the conversion rate between carbon to carbon dioxide. You have to multiply the carbon number by 3.67. So just to give you a sense of what we are talking about, between 2 to 6 billion tons of carbon means we are talking about, say, 7 billion tons at the low end, 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and about 18 billion tons at the high end. Now, to appreciate that number, the United States yearly emissions are about 6 billion tons. And China's yearly emissions per annum is about 12 billion tons, or 11 point something or the other. So if you combine both, you come to the high end of what the ocean twilight zone does without any effort by us. So it's doing it year after year. And even assuming that the only low end is right, we are talking about the total emissions from the United States. And that is really a big number. And I want you to take that home with you in terms of appreciating what the ocean twilight zone is doing. Now, how much of what these creatures sequester stays in the ocean and at what depth is still subject to more research, and we don't have all that numbers. But it is subject to, of course, the biological processes, and then there are some of our own experts from the institution that are here that can talk about these issues better than I. But of all the various findings that I have picked up, but this is the one I thought is the most appropriate and relevant, for our purposes. Now, the reason we have this ocean pavilion with all the partners that we brought together is to highlight facts of this kind and others that are very pertinent to climate negotiators. So we do not inadvertently take away the ability of these creatures to do what they're doing without any intervention by us and make our life that much harder and more difficult to reach the goals set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. But in doing that, I'm not trying to suggest that what we do might affect the creatures there. I'm not trying to suggest that we have to be careful. If we don't, they are not going to be able to continue doing what they're doing and naturally complicate our problems. But we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful, when we think about any intervention in the ocean and the potential impact that it has to marine environment, oftentimes is couched in terms of, well, whatever that we do to interfere is going to destabilize the marine ecosystem. But what we are doing right now, by increasing the temperature and not controlling the way we have agreed to in these international agreements, is interfering with the marine environment. We need to be mindful of that, talk about so actively. The reason we have this ocean pavilion is simply to highlight these kinds of issues and to bring to the attention of the negotiators. And the work that needs to be done is not just with reference to the climate COP, but it's more largely, and my good friend Cymie is going to talk about the ocean governance issues after me, but we need to be mindful of connecting the dots, and we are not doing that very well. The Climate Convention adopted in '92 did not have any provisions to talk about its impact on the marine environment and what we need to do. And that continued to Paris Climate Agreement. We talk about that in the preambular sections of it, et cetera, but not in terms of any action point. And the same thing is true of the Law of the Sea Convention in 1982. It's, of course, 40 years old, and we didn't know much about climate at the time. But even in the most recent agreement, on the High Seas Agreement, which is, of course, a phenomenal accomplishment, 20 years of negotiations. We've, given the state of affairs in the international community, any agreement that brings all parties together is something to be very pleased about. But that also does not include the climate impacts on the ocean in a substantial manner. So if you Google it, find references to climate a few times, but not action items. So what we are trying to do here is really to bring those factors into the global stocktake discussions and then see where we are going with it. the holistic approach is what we need, and that's what I think this meeting and this conference will tell us, not only to the climate negotiators, but moving forward to other ocean-related agreement. The one point is that if by not doing something to the marine environment, we are not doing bad things to the marine environment, and we want to be mindful of that. With that, in the interest of what you said, Eric, to save time for Q&A, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
So much for the invitation and the opportunity to bring law into the room. We usually like to say, bring the ocean into the room. So now we're going to bring law into the room with the ocean. And I'm going to be speaking to our current regulatory context to meet the challenge, and specifically about the new High Seas Biodiversity Treaty, which is also known by the more complicated name of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, BB&J agreement. Okay, if I slip and I refer to it that way, you'll know. So we have, as you've heard, an ecosystem that's rich in life, that's critical to both Earth's natural ability to sequester excess atmospheric carbon, and it's also absolutely critical to ocean food webs. We also have industrial interests in fishing, in artificial carbon sequestration in the Twilight Zone that would add direct impacts to those already being caused by climate change, ocean acidification, and the prospect of deep seabed mining that would add pollution to the cumulative impacts on this incredibly valuable yet sensitive resource. We need policy that will preserve the integrity of the Twilight Zone ecosystem. So what do we need to do that? It's got to include cooperation on conservation, the cooperation should include agreement on conservation objectives and principles, especially the necessity for a precautionary approach in light of our limited understanding. It must include a science-based approach to managing human activities, and it must have some component of compliance with the agreed measures. Currently, very little that's specific to these industries or to this ecosystem exists. There's no central forum or process that brings all of these interests together. What we have is very fragmented, siloed, and often according to industrial sector. Let's start out with the climate change regime. Well, as my friend and colleague Rama said, the ocean's been left out. It's not seriously on the agenda at this COP this morning. I heard that it has so far been left completely out of the global stocktake. Shocking. We need to focus on coordination between international treaties, particularly the climate change treaties and the ocean treaties that I'm going to focus on. So one thing you need to understand about this is that that was my old slide. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what you're seeing in these two slides, the dark blue area in the slide on the left is, thanks to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, an image of the approximate extent of the Twilight Zone. And if you look at the image on the right, you see the legal boundaries. So you see the land masses. You see the dark blue is the area of the ocean that nations have some kind of legal authority over, where national law can prescribe what will take place there. The light blue, that's what we call the high seas. And the high seas are subject to very limited national authority. So what you see is that most of the Twilight Zone is in this global commons area. That's critically important in thinking about how to advance our policy directions, okay? Okay, now I've got to remember which thing I'm advancing here. Okay. I want to turn to a slightly dry slide, but you don't need to actually read it. This is some of the key elements of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea that Rama referred to. The two essential elements that you have to know are the ocean zones that it designates that you just saw, and two measures. The freedom of the high seas is embedded. So this is includes the freedom to fish. That is a modified freedom, but it does put the kind of balance on states' rights to fish, which leaves the Mesopelagic zone vulnerable, okay? But also, there's important environmental protections. And the key there is the article that says that states have the duty to protect and preserve the marine environment. Okay, so we've got this tension between these. The other thing that we have is that this convention, although it's widely regarded as the Constitution of the Oceans broadly applied, it's very general, and it's implemented through specific treaties. The specific treaties for fisheries are the regional fisheries management organizations, which are dominated by the fisheries industry. But those instruments could be tools. Many of them could regulate fishing activity should it commence in the Twilight zone. So that would be an area to put some attention to. We need to implement protocols on exploratory fishing. That might be another effort. International guidelines could be developed through the Food and Agriculture Organization for some kind of international agreements on this. And states could agree to having a fishing moratorium on this area of the ocean, this layer, on the model of the Central Arctic Ocean Agreement, which was recently agreed. States whose national waters encircle the Central Arctic Ocean and some with particular interest in fishing there did put in place a time-limited moratorium to allow for research to be done before fishing takes place. We have almost no regulation of marine CDR, carbon dioxide removal, except for some very limited measures through the London Convention and the London Protocol and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, I'm hoping I have a couple of minutes more to talk about the BB&J agreement. So after a very lengthy negotiation, in June, this treaty was adopted, and it was open for signature at the UN in September and had a very strong response. It covers areas beyond national jurisdiction, so that light blue area that is most of the ocean. Its goal is to provide for conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity. What it will provide, one of the key elements that it will provide is a forum, a regular meeting for states to get together, to cooperate and coordinate on ocean governance, like this Conference of the Parties that we're at now, where states talk about climate change. We have not had that for the high seas. It puts forward the principles of precaution, stewardship, an ecosystem approach, the common heritage. As Rama said, there's no direct prohibition in the agreement on emissions of greenhouse gases or carbon sequestration measures in the ocean, but it provides for an environmental assessment process that will make visible and transparent activities that are proposed, will place a requirement that they should be conducted consistent with the prevention of significant adverse impacts, creating a virtual circle of science, activities, monitoring, revising the activity to ensure that it's safe. It also provides for marine protected areas, a key element in ecosystem resilience. So it also has an important element of access to capacity building and technology transfer for developing states. So to conclude, I'd like to suggest that governments can be urged to sign, ratify, and implement the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty in ways that will be protective of the twilight zone. For scientists to collaborate in ways that will support precautionary decision-making. For civil society to educate the public on the value of ocean ecosystems, and for industry to take seriously the notion that they should first do no harm, apply precaution, transparency, and long-term stewardship principles. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Cymie. So now we're going to go to Dr. Mariano Gutierrez on the screen.
Hello, good afternoon. Many thanks for the invitation for being here to introduce this topic of the Peruvian anchovy fishery and the drive to diversify target species. Many thanks also to Environmental Defense Fund for the invitation. I don't know if should I share my screen. I don't see my slides, sorry.
I'll advance the slides for you.
Okay. Okay. Next slide, please.
So the Humboldt current slide is up there.
Okay, thank you. As an introduction, I can say that the Humboldt current system is one of the world's most productive large marine ecosystems, representing between 5 to 20% of our global fish catch, depending on El Niño conditions in a given year, and generating goods and services of around $20 billion of US dollars annually. This includes almost 400,000 jobs for approximately 160,000 artisanal fisheries that operate 30,000 fishing vessels or fishing boats in the region. Next, please. There are several modes of variability in the Humboldt current system. One of them is El Niño, here on the left side, expressed in terms of sea surface temperature anomaly. El Niño events cause a decrease in primary and secondary productivity, with negative impacts on most of marine species. That variability is expected to increase in the next decades because of climate change effects. Variability also produces changes in distribution, like in the case of the jumbo squid, Gutierrez, on the right side, which in the last 30 years expanded its biogeographic distribution further north and south to match the large high productivity triangle that goes from Alaska to Patagonia and the Central Pacific. In this large area, the Mesopelagic species are abundant and sustain this squid expansion. Next, please. The Peruvian anchovy fishery has been the largest of all in the world by volume in the last 25 years, along which its total biomass has been fluctuating around 10 million tons, thanks to an adaptive precautionary management that has been able to deal with the uncertainty caused by the environmental variability. However, there have been changes in the distribution pattern and an increase of the proportion of juvenile fish in the population. Also, IMARPE, the Peruvian Sea Research Institute, and the industry detected a continuous overall decrease in the fat content in anchovies since 2000. At the same time, maximum fish size reduced over time. We are looking at this graphic, which shows the variation in fat content of anchovy. It's out of discussion the need to prioritize the sustainability of anchovy stock, but also the catches have been reduced over time, with negative impacts in the fisheries sector, the local economies, and the country. Next, please. This year, facing a strong El Nino event, the Peruvian government decided not to open the first fishing season due to the high abundance of juvenile fish. This decision has been taken 8 times during the last decade to protect anchovy because the high proportion of juvenile fish. The reduced catches this year also are a negative impact on world aquaculture. No less than 30% of the world production is sustained with fish meal produced in Peru. Also, the detected reduction of fat content in anchovy is affecting the production of essential omega-3 fatty acids for direct human consumption. Today, 80% of fish oil produced in the world goes to the concentration of omega-3, and the percentage is increasing 2% every year. Next, please. Since 1998, the Peruvian Marine Research Institute has been monitoring mesopelagic species. A considerable amount of knowledge on biology, ecology, behavior, and biomass of mesopelagic fishes has been generated in the last 25 years. Now, when the world is paying more attention to mesopelagic species, an opportunity exists to diversify the Peruvian industrial fishery not to depend exclusively on anchovy. Mesopelagics are by far the most abundant group of fishes in the ocean. The energy transfer efficiency from phytoplankton to mesopelagic fishes in the open ocean will be higher than what is typically assumed. For instance, they are rich in the omega-3 fatty acids, which can only be obtained from phytoplankton. The future scenarios for mesopelagic species are all favorable to an increase in the abundance of these species. The International Council of the Exploration of the Sea is leading studies and catch trials of mesopelagic fishes in the North Atlantic, the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, and there are other experiences in South Africa, Oman, and in Peru. Next, please, and the last one. In conclusions, mesopelagic fish stocks exhibits a large fluctuation in biomass, spawning and recruitment, especially in Peru. El Nino impacts distribution and life history of species in the Humboldt current. El Nino impacts the distribution and life history of most species in the Humboldt current system. Anchovy biomass remains a good level at around 10 million tons since 2000, but proportion of juvenile fish have increased to near 50% of biomass in 2023. Peru's industrial fisheries sustain more than 30% of the world aquaculture. Management prioritizes anchovy catch, but fishing quotas are decreasing over time. The continued ability to sustain the global fish meal and fish oil supply will likely require diversification of target species. The abundance of mesopelagic fishes might increase under climate change scenarios, and finally, developing mesopelagic fisheries might be possible, but we need to understand impacts on carbon cycling. Many thanks to you.
Thank you, Mariano.
Thank you.
Peter, the floor is yours.
Well, I think Cymie explained everything that I needed to explain to, so I can probably just sit down. Okay, look, I went to Woods Hole maybe 6 years ago and first heard about the Twilight Zone. I'd read about it a little bit, but to actually sit down with the scientists who were working on it, boy, that was a mind-blowing experience. Biggest diurnal migration on the planet. This Mexican wave going around the planet every day. Biggest migration of life on the planet happening out of sight, out of mind for humanity. We all know about the wildebeests and the Serengeti doing their annual migration. You know, we all know about the birds doing their migrations and all this, but who knows about that diurnal migration, the biggest one on the planet? Nobody. Why? Because we don't teach ocean science, ocean literacy. It's crazy. You've all heard me on Prochlorococcus. Far more important than pandas or lions or tigers or elephants for our survival. You know, it produces 20% of the oxygen in the biosphere, Prochlorococcus. Why don't you teach us that in school? You know, we have to discover it like it's some secret held by scientists. So when I came away from Woods Hole, I thought, my God, you know, I've really been enlightened here. What does it actually mean? To me, it's like, I'm not a scientist, so I sort of tend to see things in simple terms. And to me, it seemed like, wow, I've just heard about the lungs of the planet. You know, this movement, just every day, there's the biggest migration of life going around the world. Or this is what our lungs do, you know. They breathe in and out, the pressures, and, you know, and for us to somehow interfere with that, just to me is just like somebody saying, okay, well, look, I can make a bit of money out of chopping some of your lung out and selling it to a restaurant. You know, you can't have it, sorry. It's not available on the market. We don't want you interfering with the lungs of the planet. That's where I came away from Woods Hole, feeling like. We're going to win that battle? Unlikely. Homo sapiens is a very greedy species. There will be some interference with it, but we've got to do our best to protect it, and the best way we can do that is really invest in ocean science. The scientists who are working on this have got a duty to come up with the best of their recommendations, and that work needs to be done urgently, because you can be sure there's plenty of corporations around the world that are thinking, whoa, our next, you know, look at all those buffaloes, let's shoot them. Okay, look at all those, what do you call them? The toothfish, or there's a name for it? No, the most abundant bristlemouth, the most abundant animal on the earth, right? And not being exploited by us. What's wrong with us? You know, get down there, kill them, turn them into fish meal. That's our attitude. That's Homo sapiens. Same can be said for the deep sea. You know, we're going to go down there next. The most amazing life that we know about, far more amazing than Homo sapiens, life existing in total darkness with no light, either in extreme cold or extreme heat. You know, what and amazing life when you see the photographs of it. We were told it's an abyss, there's nothing down there, what does it matter, go and exploit it. No. The more we learn every day through ocean science, the more incredible this life is. And when we have obliterated life on the surface by our highway to hell, as I call it, to 3 degrees global warming, that life will still be down there. It might be the only life remaining in the universe, for all we know. And it'll evolve over hundreds of millions of years into the intelligent life that can then re-inhabit the surface. Who knows, you know? But all I'm saying to you is, in your rush to make more money, do not mess with the Twilight Zone as if it's just one more piece of nature to rape and pillage. That's my attitude. And it needs the science. And we need to invest in the science, and then the scientists need to present. And the best place to present will be, you know, these international conferences that we've got coming up. There's the UN Ocean Conference in Nice in June 2025 will focus heavily on finance and on ocean science. And there will be this congress for about 4 days prior to the UN Ocean Conference, which is specifically on ocean science. They estimate somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 of the world's best ocean scientists will be there. That's the sort of place that Twilight Zone has got to be, findings have got to be on the table, discussed with recommendations given through to the Ocean Conference in the following week, so that we can start, you know, sensibly looking at this, at the lungs of our planet, and getting some regulations in place. And can I just, because Cymie did such a good job for me, can I say that all those things are coming, it's great that we're doing all that, but they're all connected. You know, you can't talk about 30 by 30 global biodiversity framework without thinking about vast marine protected areas in the high seas. So we should now, because it's still way down the line before that BB&J treaty comes into existence, We should now be talking about, okay, what parts of the world are we going to be putting into marine protected areas to get to that 30%, because otherwise we fail at both. So everything is connected, and Twilight Zone's a big part of it. Thank you.
So thank you, Peter. We can always count on you to make it real. And thank you all. I mean, I think what you see here is this either perfect storm or perfect opportunity emerging. We are at a place where the scientific understanding by orders of magnitude around the role that these species play is improving. We are at this precipice of, ratifying the High Seas Treaty, and we've got this global climate crisis around which, these species play an important role. And unfortunately, they're not already accounted for in the global sets of pie charts that talk about what is going to be required to get to net zero by mid-century. And then we've got, as so articulately represented by Mariano and then expanded upon by Peter, this risk that there's commercial interest, turning to this very important resource. And I think, Peter, the only thing I would add to what you say about the protected area aspirations for the high seas is that 30 by 30 might not be big enough. I think we need to think about this first and foremost as a global climate commons and build from there, or work backwards from there. So we do have some time for some conversation, and I do hope some of you are equipped with some questions for one or more of our panelists. Yes, and I think we have a microphone here. And that will be particularly important for Mariano.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the interesting topic. The question is not for someone specific. It's just, I'm curious, as humans, we try to simplify. We go shallow, we go deep. So I can imagine that as we are working in this area that include both, so what are the challenges that we are seeing as a scientist? Like the science to work in this topic that is connectivity, right? So we are always, so it's like it's a room for some specific scientists that they work in this specific topic, or it's just we need to make sure that the people that work in the shallow talk to the one that that they work in the deep. But this is my thinking. It's like something that we are missing there is just we need more scientists that they work in this specific topic, or we just need the shallow to talk to the deep.
Yeah, I think the science is a great question. I think, and Rama, I might have scared you into going too fast, because one of the things that Woods Hole and Scripps together are doing is really modeling, and characterizing, the nature and the extent of these species and their interactions and associated risks. And so maybe you could say just a bit more about the science and perhaps then the connections between the inshore ocean scientists and the Twilight Zone offshore ocean scientists.
Thank you very much for that question, and thank you, Eric. This is on. I can put you in touch with our colleagues who are right here from Woods Hole, as well as from Scripps, that can give you a more detailed answer. But in terms of the point that I made about the carbon that is sequestered by these creatures, we need a lot more information. We need a lot more specificity, and that requires a lot more research. And then that spans the entire area that you're talking about. So without going too deep into it, Ben, do you want to say anything more about that issue? Yeah, okay, good. But I can put you in touch with our colleagues, Ken Bissler, who is here, who might be able to address that, and there are other scientists as well. Okay, thank you.
Yes, all the way in the back.
Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. My question is more into the policy area, and how can we bridge all this scientific knowledge into more applied policy, like public policy and politics, in a short term? Like, I think usually those discussions takes a lot of time to move from the science into the politics. But do you maybe have any strategy in mind that may help us, new generations, to move this faster and work on it? Thank you.
I can give an initial crack at that, but Rama or Peter might want to add to that. One of the things that we're trying to do with new treaties is to include scientific bodies that will, on an ongoing basis, be able to bridge the science and into the policy decisions of the treaty body. We found during the BB&J, the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty negotiations, that side events like this one, but during the negotiations, afforded an opportunity for the scientists to come and speak to the negotiators and inform them as they were designing the regulatory regime. Those are a couple of ideas, but let my colleagues answer.
Just to add to what Cymie had said, historically, we have entered into international agreements after some kind of an environmental disaster. But in modern times, science is telling us what we need to do without such a disaster. For example, ozone is an example. I mean, ozone, of course, is it's both. We have discovered the ozone hole and we want to do something about it. But climate clearly is based on science that, the first assessment report of the IPCC came before the 1992 agreement came. So it is based on science. What we are, as Cymie pointed out, because of that, those agreements have always had a scientific body. Member countries discuss the science that is coming out and then say what sorts of decisions need to be taken. So it is going both ways. Scientists informing the policymakers about agreements, and the policymakers, depending on the decisions that they have taken, asking scientists for more information. Well, if we want to do this, how do we go about doing that? So the process is very good. We are doing the right things, but that is not enough. That's what we are talking about here in this context. And we have been at it now for some 30 years, and emissions continue to increase. And so we need to figure out how to fix that. And that is why I'm going to give the microphone to Peter, and then he's going to tell us that.
No, I think your two answers have adequately answered that question. So I'm going to put a question myself. When I was looking at Cymie's maps, they were very provoking. One of the things was that there was all these shallow areas just off Argentina, Southeast Asia, up in the Arctic areas, and around Great Britain, North Sea. And I was thinking, why is that? There's no twilight. I guess it's shallow seas, is it? The sea is shallow in those places where there's no twilight zone. Is that it? I guess. Anyway, the other thing that struck me was when you look at the size of the EEZs of the world, and realize that, okay, imagine we got a marine protected area for all of the high seas and said no twilight zone interference in the high seas. But of course, under UNCLOS, people have got their own decisions to make about exploitation of the economic resources within their EEZs. What if they start giving out licenses to interfere with the twilight zone in their EEZs? Because when you look at that map, that's a pretty huge area. So again, I think the onus is on science to do the job robustly now, get it clearly out there that, hey, muck with the twilight zone, and you'll be mucking with your surface marine life, and hopefully you'll be able to prove that through science, because then it would not be in the economic interests of, let's say, my own country, Fiji, to muck with the twilight zone with it in its waters because of what it would do to life on the surface that we depend on. Thanks. I think that's the question.
So Peter, just to follow just one step further, and while you have the microphone, because you talked about the opportunity to put this science on the table in these upcoming ocean conferences. But it strikes me that one of the challenges that we have is that the science, the characterization, and understanding of these systems and the role they're playing is evolving. And yet we don't have time to wait for that perfect information. And I wonder if you have an opinion as to how best to put this evolving understanding into play in a timely fashion, given the risks and the imperatives.
Okay, well, you know, there is truth, there is scientific fact, but we all know it's evolving, right? It because of the work you do, you know, science grows, truths actually supersede each other, but there is an ultimate truth on a subject like this. So you've got to keep doing the research to produce that. Look, what can we do as humans? The best we can do is convene ourselves in meetings of the people that matter, in this case, ocean scientists. And those meetings are coming up. I described the one in Nice that's coming up in June 25. It's really important that this topic is on the table big time and that it's being reported on. Same thing with marine CDR. I'm starting a process which will ensure that we can look at good, robust science on that when we get together in Nice. But there's another meeting which is really important in the interim for you all, which on this subject, which is the midterm review, if you want to call it that, of the UN Decade of Ocean Science, which is happening in Barcelona in April. And the reason that is so important is that 194 member states of the United Nations, that's all of us, agreed back in, when was it, 2018, I think it was, that we would have this decade of ocean science getting underway in 2021. Why did we go to that? Because we were told that we only know somewhere like 20% of the scientific properties of the ocean. And at a time when, you know, we're approaching these big planetary decisions to be made, you know, some would call it geoengineering, others have nicer words for it, but those big planetary decisions, which obviously have to be universal decisions, need the science before we can make sensible decisions. So that's where the decade was instituted. Now, this meeting in Barcelona in April is a review of that. How are we going? What are we missing? Where are the gaps, etc. But I mean, the good news is that ocean science is receiving more attention now and more investment than ever before in human history. So, you know, there is effect on bringing that decade into existence.
Thank you. Cymie?
To take this one step further too, I think you may be wondering, well, if we don't have the science and there's this human nature that is pushing us to use these resources or to pollute them, then how do we deal with that? And so the policy answer that we have is precaution, right? It's the precautionary principle. If you don't have scientific certainty, then don't do something that might cause harm. The problem with that is that it needs to have enormous support from government, scientists, and civil society to hold back the excited horses of the economy, right? I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And I actually want to bring Mariano back into this because, you know, not that long ago when we started talking about this issue, the response we got was there's no risk. And one of the reasons that nobody was casting an eye toward, you know, exploitation of these species. And I think one of the things that I don't really have a specific question, Mariano, because I think you sort of answered that question and identified that challenge pretty clearly. But I think one of the other dimensions that we're going to have to deal with in a global context is there any type of a balance, or is there any type of like exploitation that we could manage for while still protecting the fundamental function of these resources and the climate role that they play?
Yes, this possibility of developing new fisheries on Mesopelagic fishes needs regulations. Not only at the national, international one. For instance, the Regional Fisheries Management Organization should produce regulations thinking in these possible fisheries on Mesopelagic fishes. For instance, I am co-chair of one working group in the South Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Organization, and we are really introduced that topic in the organization. We are planning to perform a large-scale survey in the coming years to make science on these species. There is a high number of species involved. This is a challenge that we need to do. As I said, not only at the national level, but at the international level and even at the level of the Convention of United Nations Convention of Climate Change. This is not going to be easy. It is going to be expensive, but it's extremely necessary.
Thank you. All right, last call for questions. Any last comments from any of our panel members?
I want to react to what you asked, Eric.
Oh, sorry, yes.
You know, I think that's a profoundly important question. And I don't think I have an answer for that, but I just want to share with you, you know, the precautionary principle as we developed has, you know, at least two sides to it, and we have not fully appreciated it. Not doing something to harm the circumstances, of course, you know, well understood, but not doing anything is not going to keep the purity as we expect to continue in that shape. I mean, so that's something that we need to be mindful of it. And, you know, we, in the Woodside Oceanographic Institution in particular, say, well, we want to get the science right, you know, so we're doing it, hold off. I mean, you know, the response from other interested parties is, what? You know, the situation is going down, you know, the drain, and then you want us to not do anything? Just wait for you to come and tell us. I mean, so it is something that we need to really pay attention to and understand how to do both, you know, without causing irreparable harm to the environment.
Thank you. So I just want to thank you all for coming. I want to tell you that this session will be repeated around the corner in the Nature Pavilion tomorrow morning at 9. So feel free to share your excitement about this with your friends. It is a critically important topic, and we're really pleased to have the opportunity to bring it to the forefront here. And I just would ask you to join me again in thanking all of our panelists for a wonderful job in presenting this, this issue. Thank you.